The sound of clinking glasses and muffled conversations filled the air. The crisp scent of disinfectant mixed with the faint aroma of fresh coffee brewing in the break room. Mr. Samuel, back slightly bent with age, moved quietly between the desks, polishing surfaces with a practiced hand. His uniform, clean but frayed at the edges, was a testament to years of hard work. "Mr. Samuel!" The sharp voice of Alex Morrison cut through the hum like a whip. Heads turned as he strode across the room, face flushed with irritation. He was holding a coffee-stained report like it was a tainted relic. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll clean it up right away," Mr. Samuel said, eyes downcast but voice steady. "No, Mr. Samuel. Sorry doesn't cut it. We don't have room for mistakes," Alex snapped, tossing the papers onto Mr. Samuel's cart. A few stifled gasps and exchanged glances said what words could not. As the tense silence settled, Mr. Samuel's hand tightened around an old, creased photograph in his pocket, a reminder of who he once was and the power of kindness that had changed his life forever. And, unbeknownst to Alex, it was about to change his as well. The office resumed its rhythm after the confrontation, but an air of unease lingered. Whispers followed Mr. Samuel as he methodically wiped the stained pages, his expression unreadable. The junior staff exchanged uneasy looks, some with pity, and others with subtle annoyance at the disruption. Mr. Samuel moved to the corner of the room where sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting shadows on the floor. He pulled the worn photograph from his pocket and gazed at it. It showed a younger version of himself, standing in front of an audience, a proud smile across his face, holding a prestigious award for humanitarian work. The image was a testament to the life he once led, a life filled with respect, purpose, and sacrifice. But those days were gone, swept away by time and fate. The young intern, Lena, watched him from her desk. She had always found Mr. Samuel kind, offering a smile or a few words of wisdom when she felt lost. Today, seeing him humiliated stirred something inside her. She approached with hesitant steps, careful not to draw attention. "Mr. Samuel, are you okay?" she asked in a whisper. He tucked the photograph back into his pocket and offered her a gentle nod. "I'm fine, dear. Thank you for asking." Before Lena could say more, Alex's voice boomed from his office. "Lena, I need those files now." She glanced back at Mr. Samuel, guilt written on her face, before hurrying away. But the seed of curiosity had been planted in her mind. Alex sat at his desk, tapping his pen against the polished wood, frustration bubbling under the surface. The pressure to perform was relentless, and every slip felt like a potential disaster. He glanced at the pile of resumes on his desk. Young, hungry graduates all vying for the position beneath him. There was no room for mistakes. Yet, an unsettling feeling from his earlier outburst wouldn't fade. As he sifted through reports, a soft knock interrupted his thoughts. It was Lena, placing the files on his desk. Her eyes darted to the newspaper clipping sticking out from under some papers, the one Alex had overlooked in the pile he collected from the break room. It featured an old story titled, "Professor Samuel Jennings Honored for Community Heroism." Lena's curiosity turned into shock. She blinked and looked at Alex, who had finally noticed the clipping. His brow furrowed as he pulled it out, reading the headline with a frown. His eyes flicked up to Lena. "Do you know anything about this?" She shook her head. "No, sir, but I think we should." Alex's gaze dropped back to the paper, realization starting to creep in like a chill. The next day, Alex arrived early, unable to shake off the story or the haunting eyes of the elderly janitor. The title, Professor, echoed in his mind, clashing with the worn-out uniform he'd seen Mr. Samuel wear every day. He called a quick meeting in the break room under the pretense of an all-hands cleaning day, ensuring Mr. Samuel would be there. As they gathered, Alex stood in front of the team, gripping the newspaper clipping tightly. "Mr. Samuel," Alex began, voice wavering, "I came across this article. Is this you?" The room fell silent, every eye on the old janitor. Mr. Samuel stood straighter than usual, looking around at the sea of faces before his eyes met Alex's. For the first time, Alex saw not an elderly janitor, but a man with depth, history, and the remnants of pride. "Yes," Mr. Samuel said quietly. "That was me." A murmur passed through the crowd as Alex's grip on the paper loosened. The truth, unveiled so simply, left him shaken. The man he'd berated was more than what he seemed. He was a hero who had lost everything for the sake of others. The weight of Alex's earlier actions crushed him with the force of regret. Mr. Samuel stepped forward, eyes glassy with memories. "I once believed that kindness was enough to change the world," he began, voice strong but tinged with sorrow. "But I also learned it comes with a cost." As he recounted how he had lost his position and his family in the fight for justice, the room grew quieter still. His story was one of sacrifice, of giving all he had for those who couldn't speak for themselves. When the system fought back, he was left with nothing but the clothes on his back and the will to keep going. Alex's heart thudded in his chest. The office that had once been his kingdom now felt like a prison of his own making. The days that followed the revelation were different. The air in the office, once filled with idle chatter and hurried typing, was now quieter, more reflective. Whispers of Mr. Samuel's past echoed through hallways, carried from one cubicle to another like a soft, respectful breeze. Alex could not shake off the weight of his actions. Every glance at Mr. Samuel was a reminder of his arrogance and ignorance. Determined to make amends, he started small, a quiet, "good morning" as he passed by, asking the cleaning staff if they needed help with supplies, and making sure Mr. Samuel's workload was lighter. Mr. Samuel noticed these changes but said nothing. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silent acknowledgement, an unspoken understanding that healing takes time. One afternoon, Lena approached Alex with an idea. "Why don't we hold a small event to honor Mr. Samuel's contributions, not just to us, but to the world?" Alex, caught off guard, nodded slowly. It was a step towards redemption, one that felt overdue. The idea of hosting an event was met with mixed reactions. Some of the employees were excited, eager to show their newfound respect for Mr. Samuel. Others were skeptical, wondering why a simple janitor deserved such recognition. This division unsettled Alex, reminding him that change, no matter how genuine, is often met with resistance. One evening, as Alex lingered in the empty office, Mr. Samuel approached him. "You're trying to make things right, Alex," he said, the corners of his mouth lifting into a faint smile. "But remember, real change doesn't come from a single act. It's a series of them." Alex met his gaze, feeling both humbled and inspired. "I know, Mr. Samuel. I want to do better." Mr. Samuel's eyes softened. "Then start by being kind when it's hardest." The day of the event arrived. The break room had been transformed with simple decorations and a makeshift podium. The staff gathered, curiosity mingling with anticipation. Alex stood at the front, palms slightly sweaty, heart thudding in his chest. This wasn't just about Mr. Samuel. It was about changing the culture of their workplace. "Today, we're here to acknowledge someone who has taught us the value of humility and kindness through quiet actions," Alex began, his voice steady but charged with emotion. "Mr. Samuel is more than the sum of his work here. He's a reminder that every person we meet carries a story, one that deserves to be heard and respected." The room fell silent as Mr. Samuel stepped forward. His expression was one of gratitude and pride, a man no longer shadowed by his past, but illuminated by the recognition he deserved. "Thank you," he said, voice strong and clear. "I'm not here because I want to be remembered for who I was, but to remind you that the power of kindness can change more than you can imagine. It can change lives. It changed mine." A round of applause erupted, genuine and heartfelt. Alex felt a knot in his chest loosen, replaced by warmth and hope. As the office settled back into its usual pace in the weeks that followed, the small acts of kindness continued to ripple outward. Employees who once avoided eye contact now exchanged smiles and greetings. Mistakes were met with patience rather than frustration. Alex found himself transformed, not just as a manager, but as a person. He saw the power in listening, in understanding that leadership wasn't about commanding respect but earning it through empathy and action. One evening, as Alex prepared to leave, he spotted Mr. Samuel near the window, watching the sunset. He approached and stood beside him in silence. "Thank you for showing me who I was too blind to see," Alex said quietly. Mr. Samuel's eyes, wise and knowing, met his. "It was always there, Alex. You just had to open your eyes." The golden light of the setting sun bathed the room, as if sealing the moment with quiet approval. The journey wasn't just Mr. Samuel's or Alex's. It was a testament to everyone who dared to believe that kindness, no matter how small, could spark a transformation that echoed far beyond the walls of an office. The weeks turned into months, and the shift in the office culture became more noticeable. Employees who once saw each other only as colleagues now shared conversations beyond work. Birthday cards passed around, spontaneous acts of support, and shared laughter in the break room painted a different picture from the sterile environment that once existed. Alex continued to foster this new culture, implementing team-building activities and open-door policies. He learned to value not just productivity, but the well-being of those he managed. In return, his team grew more loyal, their work more meaningful. One evening, Lena approached Mr. Samuel as he cleaned the common area. "You know," she said, her voice warm, "I don't think this place would have changed if it wasn't for you." Mr. Samuel paused, leaning on his broom with a thoughtful smile. "It's not just me, Lena. Change comes from everyone willing to take the first step. Even Alex had to find that out on his own." The words settled in Lena's mind, making her realize that sometimes the strongest lessons come from the quietest voices. Alex hadn't yet reached out to Mr. Samuel personally, outside of their professional interactions. One evening, he asked Mr. Samuel to join him for coffee in the nearby cafe. It was a gesture that surprised the elderly janitor, but one he accepted with a small nod. Sitting across from each other in the warm glow of the cafe lights, Alex broke the silence. "I owe you more than just an apology," he began, searching for the right words. "You taught me that real leadership isn't about power, but about compassion. I didn't know how lost I was until I met you." Mr. Samuel sipped his coffee, eyes twinkling with understanding. "Life teaches us in strange ways, Alex. Sometimes we're the student when we think we're the teacher." The two shared stories, laughing and exchanging memories that spanned generations. Alex spoke of his father's high expectations and how that pressure had shaped him. Mr. Samuel shared tales of students who had once filled lecture halls, listening to his words of wisdom. The cafe became a space where past mistakes were forgiven and new beginnings were celebrated. For Alex, it was more than a conversation. It was a path to true understanding. Word of the office's transformation began to spread. Clients noticed the change in energy, and positive feedback poured in. The company even started a small community outreach program spearheaded by Alex and supported by Mr. Samuel's quiet advice. During a volunteer event at a local shelter, Alex and Mr. Samuel stood side by side, helping distribute meals. A young man approached Mr. Samuel, eyes wide with recognition. "Are you Professor Jennings?" he asked, voice trembling. Mr. Samuel's expression softened, and he nodded. "I was." Tears welled up in the young man's eyes. "You changed my life. Your lectures taught me to believe in myself when no one else did. I wouldn't be here without you." The moment crystallized for Alex. The true measure of impact isn't in what one accomplishes alone, but in the lives they touch along the way. Mr. Samuel, once seen as just an elderly janitor, was a man who had lit countless candles with his wisdom, even as he swept floors and mopped up after others. Mr. Samuel's story became a staple of the office's ethos. New employees were told about the janitor who once was a professor and how he helped transform a workplace that was once cold and detached into a community. Alex made sure of it, embedding that legacy into the fabric of the company's values. For Mr. Samuel, life had come full circle. Though he no longer stood before lecture halls full of eager students, he found fulfillment in knowing that his acts of kindness had rippled through the lives around him. And for Alex, every decision he made moving forward was colored by empathy, understanding that true leadership is measured by the courage to change and the humility to learn. The office thrived, not just as a place of business, but as a place of growth, kindness, and shared humanity. Mr. Samuel's story lived on in the lessons he imparted and the quiet reminders that even the smallest act of compassion can echo far beyond the moment it was given. Despite the positive changes in the office, life was never without its trials. A sudden downturn in the market affected the company's performance. The stress of potential layoffs and budget cuts loomed over everyone like a dark cloud. Employees who had grown accustomed to the newfound harmony began to retreat into worry and doubt. Alex felt the weight of responsibility more than ever. The pressure clawed at him, threatening to pull him back into old habits of harsh demands and rigid management. But this time he remembered Mr. Samuel's words, "Kindness when it's hardest." Instead of retreating into isolation, Alex called an all-hands meeting. He stood before the gathered employees, his posture strong but his eyes showing the strain of recent events. "We're facing hard times," he began, voice steady but layered with emotion. "But we're not going to fall apart. We've built something here, a culture that supports each other, and we're going to face this together. If anyone has ideas or suggestions, come forward. This is our company, and every voice matters." The room buzzed with surprise. This wasn't the Alex they had known before. This was someone who had learned the value of trust and collaboration. Slowly, hands started to rise. Ideas were shared, conversations sparked, and a collective determination took root. During these challenging days, Mr. Samuel became a quiet yet steadfast presence. He spoke words of encouragement to those who felt disheartened and offered advice to Alex, who often sought him out late in the evenings when doubts crept in. One such evening, Alex found Mr. Samuel mopping the hallway, his back slightly bent but eyes still sharp. The two exchanged a nod, and Alex leaned against the wall, exhaling heavily. "How did you handle it, Mr. Samuel, when everything you worked for was on the line?" Alex asked, breaking the silence. Mr. Samuel paused, resting his hands on the mop handle. "I reminded myself that the outcome doesn't always define the value of what we do, Alex. It's the effort, the courage to keep trying, and the willingness to stand with others when things get tough." Alex's gaze dropped to the floor, the simple yet profound truth settling within him. It wasn't just about saving the company. It was about showing his team that they mattered, that together they could weather the storm. As ideas and suggestions from the staff were implemented, the company found innovative ways to stay afloat. Team members pitched in where needed, and Alex made sure that recognition was given where it was due. The morale that had wavered began to strengthen, bolstered by the realization that they were in this together. One afternoon, Lena came to Alex with a proposal for a new product line that could appeal to a market demographic they hadn't considered before. It was risky, but it showed promise. Alex listened intently, appreciating Lena's courage to speak up in uncertain times. "Let's do it," Alex said, the room buzzing with the energy of hope. The project launched, and within weeks there were signs of recovery. Sales began to climb, and clients, noticing the resilience and unity of the team, started to return. The office, once on the brink of reverting to a place of tension and fear, found its rhythm once more. When the company stabilized, Alex gathered everyone once again, this time with an expression not of urgency, but of gratitude. Mr. Samuel stood at the back of the room, arms folded and eyes proud. "We've come through this together," Alex said, scanning the room filled with faces that now looked back at him with trust and respect. "And it's thanks to each and every one of you. Your ideas, your hard work, your support for one another. This is what saved us." He turned to where Mr. Samuel stood, eyes locking in a moment of unspoken thanks. "And to those who remind us that kindness is the backbone of resilience, we are forever grateful." Applause erupted, not just for Alex, but for everyone who had played a part in keeping the company, and each other, afloat. The lessons they had learned weren't just about surviving a financial crisis, but about the deeper truths of loyalty, compassion, and collective strength. The office entered a new era, one where teamwork and kindness were woven into the very fabric of its identity. Alex became not just a boss, but a mentor, a leader who knew that true strength lay in lifting others up. Lena continued to rise, her ideas fueling growth and inspiring others to innovate. Mr. Samuel, though still carrying out his duties with quiet grace, became something of a legend in the company. Employees, both new and old, sought him out for advice or just to hear one of his stories. He became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that everyone has a story worth knowing and that acts of kindness, no matter how small, could transform an entire community. As time passed, Mr. Samuel continued to be a cornerstone of wisdom and inspiration within the company. However, Alex noticed that age was beginning to take its toll on the elderly janitor. His steps were slower, his work more measured. The company's culture had shifted so significantly that even the idea of seeing Mr. Samuel struggle was difficult for the employees who had grown to respect him. One day, after a particularly busy morning, Alex found Mr. Samuel sitting in the break room, hands clasped around a steaming cup of tea. The usually vibrant eyes were tinged with fatigue. "Mr. Samuel, can I speak with you for a moment?" Alex asked, taking the seat opposite him. The old janitor nodded, a smile playing at his lips. "Of course, Alex. What's on your mind?" Alex took a breath, choosing his words carefully. "You've been with us for years, guiding us, teaching us, often without saying a word. We owe much of who we are as a company to you. I think it's time for you to take some well-deserved rest." Mr. Samuel's eyes glistened, understanding the implication behind Alex's words. Retirement was a natural part of life, yet he had never considered it because his work had become part of who he was. But now, surrounded by a generation he had quietly influenced, he felt a sense of peace. "I think you might be right," Mr. Samuel said softly, his smile turning wistful. "But only if I can come back every now and then to see how my family here is doing." Alex chuckled, a mix of relief and warmth flooding through him. "You're always welcome, Mr. Samuel, always." A few weeks later, the company organized a special gathering to celebrate Mr. Samuel's retirement. It was a day filled with laughter, tears, and stories shared by employees whose lives he had touched. Lena stood up and recounted the time Mr. Samuel's simple words had given her the courage to pursue her ideas, which ultimately helped save the company during their most challenging time. One by one, employees shared their stories, and each tale had a common thread. Mr. Samuel's quiet acts of kindness, his words of wisdom, and his presence that had given them strength. Finally, Alex stood at the podium, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Mr. Samuel has taught us that leadership isn't about titles or positions. It's about actions. It's about caring for those around us, even when it's not expected. Today, we're saying farewell to a man who embodied these values every day." Mr. Samuel's heart swelled with pride and gratitude as he took the podium one last time. "This isn't a goodbye," he said, eyes sweeping over the crowd of familiar faces. "It's a reminder that no matter where you go or what you do, never underestimate the power of kindness. It's what brought me here, and it's what will keep you all strong." The room erupted into applause, the echoes of appreciation ringing in the air like a hymn of gratitude. Mr. Samuel's departure marked the end of an era, but the legacy he left behind continued to shape the company's future. His words and lessons became part of the new employee handbook titled The Samuel Principle: Kindness in Leadership. It was a reminder to everyone that success wasn't just measured by profits, but by the compassion shared within the walls of their workplace. Alex continued to lead with empathy, always remembering that transformation was a journey, not a destination. Lena, now a manager herself, often quoted Mr. Samuel during meetings, ensuring that his influence continued to touch new generations of employees. And as promised, Mr. Samuel visited from time to time, a familiar face that brought comfort and inspiration. He watched with pride as the company grew, knowing that its heart remained true to the lessons he had imparted. One day, as Mr. Samuel sat by the window overlooking the bustling office, Alex approached him, 2 cups of tea in hand. They sat in companionable silence, watching the life of the company that had become more than just a workplace. It was a family. "Thank you, Mr. Samuel," Alex said quietly, the words more than just a statement. They were a promise to uphold the legacy of kindness. Mr. Samuel nodded, eyes soft and content. "Keep leading with your heart, Alex. It's what changes everything." Months after Mr. Samuel's official retirement, the company continued to thrive. The values he instilled remained at the core of its culture, evident in every decision, from management meetings to casual conversations in the break room. But as time went on, there was a growing anticipation for Mr. Samuel's occasional visits. One crisp autumn afternoon, Mr. Samuel surprised everyone by walking through the front door. The news spread like wildfire, and within minutes, employees gathered to greet him. Their faces lit up with genuine excitement, and even Alex found himself beaming with joy. "Mr. Samuel!" Lena called, weaving through the crowd to hug him. "We've missed you." The elderly man chuckled, his eyes twinkling. "I've missed you all too. I just wanted to check in and see how my favorite family is doing." Alex approached with a broad smile, shaking Mr. Samuel's hand before leading him to his office for a private chat. Once inside, they sat across from each other, the atmosphere warm with familiarity. "So, how have things been?" Mr. Samuel asked, his voice rich with curiosity. "Busy, but fulfilling," Alex replied. "I've been thinking about how we could share your story with more people, beyond just our company." Mr. Samuel tilted his head, intrigued. "And what did you have in mind?" Alex leaned forward, eyes bright with excitement. "I want to create a mentorship program for young professionals. We'll name it after you, the Samuel Initiative. It would focus on leadership, empathy, and community building." Mr. Samuel's expression softened, and he placed a hand over his heart. "That would be an honor, Alex. If it means passing on the importance of kindness and resilience to the next generation, then I'm all for it." The announcement of the Samuel Initiative was met with enthusiasm both within and outside the company. Word spread quickly, attracting interest from community leaders, educators, and other organizations that wanted to be a part of it. The program aimed to mentor young professionals, focusing on core principles such as active listening, compassionate leadership, and the importance of giving back. Lena, now a key figure in the company, was chosen to spearhead the program alongside Alex and Mr. Samuel as an advisor. Workshops were held, featuring Mr. Samuel as a guest speaker. His presence was magnetic. Stories of his life, once hidden behind the quiet hum of his janitorial work, now inspired rooms filled with eager listeners. One evening, after a successful workshop, Lena and Mr. Samuel sat in the empty conference room. The echoes of applause still seemed to linger in the air. "You know, Mr. Samuel, if someone had told me 2 years ago that the janitor would change my life, I would have laughed," Lena admitted with a smile. "But here we are, and I can't imagine this place without you." Mr. Samuel chuckled, eyes crinkling at the corners. "Life has a way of surprising us, Lena. But remember, it wasn't just me. You all chose to listen and grow. That's what made the real difference." The Samuel Initiative caught the attention of media outlets and influential leaders. One day, an unexpected visitor walked through the company's doors. Mr. Peterson, an old friend and former colleague of Mr. Samuel's from his days as a professor. He had heard about the initiative and came to see for himself if the stories were true. "Samuel Jennings, as I live and breathe," Mr. Peterson said, voice thick with emotion. The two men embraced. Years of distance and silence dissolved in a moment. "I heard about what you've been doing here, Samuel. I had to come see it with my own eyes," Mr. Peterson continued, his gaze moving around the room filled with young people engaged in discussions and activities. Mr. Samuel's eyes glistened. "It's been a journey, Peter, one I never expected, but one I'm grateful for." Mr. Peterson turned to Alex, shaking his hand firmly. "You've built something remarkable here. The world needs more leaders like you and more people like Samuel." Alex smiled, glancing at Mr. Samuel. "We're just following his lead." As the years passed, The Samuel Initiative grew beyond the company's walls. It became a city-wide program, collaborating with schools, nonprofits, and other corporations. The story of the humble janitor who was once a celebrated professor inspired countless people to embrace kindness and resilience in their personal and professional lives. Alex, now CEO of the company, ensured that Mr. Samuel's legacy was preserved. Annual events were held where Mr. Samuel's story was recounted, reminding everyone that leadership comes in many forms and that the most impactful acts are often the quietest. Mr. Samuel, now retired fully and enjoying a slower pace of life, still attended these events, sitting proudly among new generations of employees who carried his spirit forward. His eyes, filled with pride, watched as Alex, Lena, and others continued to teach the importance of compassion and integrity. One final time, at an event celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Samuel Initiative, Mr. Samuel took the stage. His voice, though older and softer, carried the same power it always had. Thank you all for carrying this torch forward. Remember, the greatest legacies aren't built in grand gestures, but in the simple acts of kindness we show every day, and when those acts ripple outward, they change the world. A standing ovation filled the room, tears glistening in the eyes of those who knew that they were part of something far bigger than themselves. A movement started by a man who believed in kindness when it was hardest, and who taught others to do the same. The success of the Samuel Initiative went far beyond the walls of the company and even the city itself. The program became a model for other organizations around the country, showing that a culture built on empathy and kindness could foster both personal and professional growth. Universities and training institutions adopted workshops inspired by Mr. Samuel's teachings, blending leadership courses with lessons on humility and service. Alex often received invitations to speak at conferences and seminars, sharing how the unlikely journey of a humble janitor turned professor became the foundation of his company's ethos. Lena, now recognized as a leading figure in workplace culture transformation, began publishing articles and speaking on how small acts of compassion could change the trajectory of a team and, ultimately, a company. Mr. Samuel, though stepping back from the spotlight, continued to inspire from behind the scenes. He would receive letters from people who had attended the workshops or heard his story, each one a testament to how his simple yet profound message resonated. Kindness is not just a value, it's a way of life. The next phase of the Samuel Initiative was to incorporate younger voices, allowing students from local schools to participate in mentorship programs. Lena and her team worked tirelessly to build partnerships with schools, creating opportunities for teenagers to learn and grow in an environment rooted in empathy and understanding. One day, Lena invited Mr. Samuel to join one of these sessions as a surprise guest. The students, initially unaware of who he was, listened intently as Lena introduced him. "This is Mr. Samuel Jennings," Lena said, her voice full of pride. "The man who taught us that kindness can transform not just an office, but an entire community." As Mr. Samuel spoke, sharing stories of his journey and the lessons he learned along the way, the students' eyes widened with admiration. He encouraged them to see kindness not as an obligation but as a choice that held the power to change their lives and the lives of those around them. One student, a quiet boy named Marcus, raised his hand. "Mr. Samuel, how did you keep going even when people didn't appreciate what you were doing?" Mr. Samuel's eyes softened, recognizing the look of doubt he had seen in himself many times before. "Marcus, sometimes it's hard to keep believing in the good when it goes unseen, but the value of kindness isn't in the recognition. It's in knowing you made someone's burden a little lighter, and that, my boy, is always worth it." Marcus's question resonated with Mr. Samuel long after the session ended. He remembered the countless moments in his life when his sacrifices went unnoticed, when he was overlooked and underestimated. Yet, seeing the new generation so eager to learn reminded him that those acts of quiet resilience were never in vain. Marcus, who had struggled with confidence and finding his voice, began to attend more workshops and eventually joined the Samuel Initiative's Youth Council. With Lena's mentorship and Mr. Samuel's encouragement, Marcus flourished, finding the courage to speak up and lead projects that supported underprivileged students in his school. Watching Marcus succeed gave Mr. Samuel a sense of fulfillment that words could hardly capture. He often sat in his favorite chair by the window at home, a warm smile on his face as he thought about how far-reaching his lessons had become. The story of an elderly janitor who once swept floors was now inspiring a young boy to take his first steps toward leadership. As Mr. Samuel's health began to wane, Alex and Lena planned a special tribute to honor him while he could still enjoy the recognition. Invitations went out to employees, partners, students, and community members whose lives had been touched by the Samuel Initiative. The event was held in a large auditorium adorned with photographs chronicling Mr. Samuel's journey, from the professor who stood before a room full of eager students to the janitor who swept floors with quiet dignity, and finally, to the mentor whose story inspired countless others. When Mr. Samuel entered the room, he was met with a standing ovation that seemed to last forever. Tears shone in his eyes as he looked out at the sea of faces, each one a testament to the power of his legacy. Alex took the stage first, voice steady but full of emotion. "Mr. Samuel, you once told me that real change doesn't come from a single act but a series of them. Tonight, we celebrate not just your acts but the countless lives those acts have changed. We're here because of you." Lena followed, recounting her journey from a timid intern to a confident leader. "Your story taught us that every person has the potential to make a difference, no matter their role or title." Finally, Marcus, now a high school senior, stepped up to the microphone, his voice clear and unwavering. "Mr. Samuel, you taught me that it's okay to be kind, even when it's hard. I promise to carry that lesson forward." Mr. Samuel stood, his body frail, but his spirit unwavering. He stepped to the podium, taking a deep breath as he looked at the faces before him, familiar and new, young and old. "I don't have many words left to say that haven't been said tonight," he began, his voice softer than before but filled with the same quiet power. "But know this, the world doesn't change all at once. It changes one small act at a time, one moment of kindness, one choice to stand by someone when no one else will. That is how we make a difference." With that, the room erupted into applause once more, not just for Mr. Samuel, but for the ideals he had lived by and shared. He took his seat, heart full, knowing that while his story was ending, the story of the Samuel Initiative was only beginning. After the tribute, Marcus felt a surge of motivation unlike anything he had experienced before. The recognition Mr. Samuel received was not just a moment of celebration, but a call to action for Marcus and others who had been touched by his lessons. As part of the Youth Council, Marcus took on a project to expand the mentorship program into local schools, targeting students who struggled with self-confidence and direction. Under Lena's mentorship and inspired by Mr. Samuel's teachings, Marcus organized workshops that included storytelling sessions, leadership exercises, and community service projects. These activities aimed to empower students to see their potential and to understand that their actions, no matter how small, could ripple outward. One day, while presenting a workshop, Marcus noticed a young girl in the back row who barely raised her head. She reminded him of himself not too long ago. During a break, he approached her and introduced himself. "Hi, I'm Marcus. What's your name?" he asked with a warm smile. The girl glanced up shyly. "Tasha," she said softly. "Nice to meet you, Tasha. You know, I used to be really nervous in places like this, but someone taught me that even when you don't feel seen, your kindness and efforts can make a difference." Tasha's eyes lit up slightly, and a small smile appeared on her face. That moment, simple as it was, became a turning point for Marcus. He realized that carrying forward Mr. Samuel's legacy meant not just grand gestures, but these small, heartfelt connections. As Marcus's confidence grew, so did the reach of the Samuel Initiative. News of the program's success attracted partnerships from other cities, leading to a network of schools and community centers adopting the model. Lena, now a celebrated speaker and advocate for empathy-driven leadership, worked alongside Marcus to expand the initiative's influence. Marcus traveled to other schools, speaking to students who felt out of place or overlooked. He shared stories about Mr. Samuel and how one man's quiet resilience inspired a movement. Every time he spoke, he felt the echoes of Mr. Samuel's voice within him, guiding his words and strengthening his resolve. The program's impact began to show tangible results. Students who once struggled with low self-esteem started stepping up as leaders in their schools, organizing volunteer activities and supporting their peers. The initiative's philosophy, kindness when it's hardest, became a motto that many carried with them beyond the school walls. One day, Marcus received an invitation from Lena to visit Mr. Samuel. His health had declined, and while he remained sharp-minded, his physical strength was waning. Marcus felt a mix of emotions as he prepared for the visit: gratitude, admiration, and a touch of sadness. When he arrived at Mr. Samuel's modest home, he was greeted warmly. The elderly man sat by the window, a blanket draped over his lap, eyes still bright with recognition. "Marcus," Mr. Samuel said, his voice softer but filled with warmth. "Come sit by me." Marcus took a seat, feeling the weight of the moment. "I wanted to thank you, Mr. Samuel, for everything. Your lessons have reached places you'd never imagine." Mr. Samuel's eyes twinkled as he nodded. "I'm proud of you, Marcus. You took what you learned and made it your own. That's what I always hoped for." They talked for hours, sharing stories about the initiative's growth and the students it had helped. Mr. Samuel listened intently, a smile never leaving his face. The sun set behind them, casting a golden glow over the room, as if sealing the moment with quiet approval. Before Marcus left, Mr. Samuel grasped his hand. "Remember, Marcus, the real test of leadership is how you act when no one is watching. Keep being kind, even when it's hard." "I will, Mr. Samuel. I promise," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. A few weeks later, the company and the Samuel Initiative received somber news. Mr. Samuel had passed away peacefully in his sleep. The announcement sent a wave of grief through the community. Alex, Lena, Marcus, and countless others who had been touched by his presence felt the loss deeply. To honor his memory, a memorial service was held, attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been changed by Mr. Samuel's lessons. Stories were shared, tears shed, and laughter erupted as people recounted moments of kindness and wisdom that defined his life. Marcus stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. "Mr. Samuel may no longer be with us, but his spirit lives on in each act of compassion we show. He taught us that leadership isn't about being in charge, it's about lifting others up. Let's carry that forward, always." In the years that followed, the Samuel Initiative grew into a national program, influencing companies, schools, and community groups to adopt its principles. The legacy of Mr. Samuel became a symbol of hope and a testament to the power of one man's quiet yet powerful resolve to spread kindness. Marcus, now a young leader and advocate for change, continued to share Mr. Samuel's story wherever he went. Lena became a co-founder of new initiatives focused on spreading kindness in corporate cultures across the globe, while Alex led the company with empathy and purpose, always keeping Mr. Samuel's words close to heart. Every year on Mr. Samuel's birthday, the company hosted an event called the Day of Kindness, where employees and community members performed acts of kindness, big and small, in his honor. It was a day that reminded everyone of the simple yet profound message Mr. Samuel left behind, that true strength lies in acts of compassion, and the smallest gesture can change the world. Years later, Marcus stood in front of a new generation of young leaders at a national conference. Behind him was a large portrait of Mr. Samuel, smiling kindly, eyes filled with the same warmth that had changed Marcus's life. "Everything we do here today, every choice to help one another, is a testament to one man's belief that kindness matters," Marcus said. "Let's not just remember Mr. Samuel, let's be Mr. Samuel to someone else." As the applause filled the hall, Marcus felt a familiar warmth settle over him, as if Mr. Samuel was watching, proud and ever present. The legacy of kindness continued, rippling outward, touching lives and changing hearts, one small act at a time. The Day of Kindness had become a staple in the community. Every year, new stories emerged of lives touched and changed by the simple acts of compassion that Mr. Samuel had championed. Marcus, now fully committed to his work as a leader within the Samuel Initiative, was constantly inspired by the stories he heard. One day, Marcus sat in his office reviewing a letter from a young woman named Eliana. She wrote about how she had attended one of the workshops during a tough period in her life. Her story was one of resilience, how she overcame personal loss and found hope in the lessons of empathy and kindness taught in the program. Moved by her words, Marcus reached out to Eliana and invited her to speak at the upcoming conference. When she arrived, Marcus was struck by her poise and quiet strength. She shared her story with an audience that sat in rapt attention, recounting how she found courage in the idea that kindness is a strength, not a weakness. As Eliana spoke, Marcus noticed the same spark in her eyes that he had seen in Mr. Samuel's many years ago. It was a reminder that the torch of kindness was being passed, generation by generation, sustaining the movement Mr. Samuel had started. Eliana's speech became a turning point for many in the audience. Inspired by her story, students and professionals alike began creating their own initiatives within their schools and workplaces. Stories poured in from cities across the country. A group of high school students formed a kindness club that provided supplies for underprivileged classmates. A corporate office started a program to help employees support each other during personal crises. Each new story reinforced the idea that the Samuel Initiative was no longer just a program. It was a movement that spanned generations and transcended boundaries. Marcus and Lena traveled together to support these grassroots efforts. On one trip, they visited a community center where children from difficult backgrounds were learning to help each other and develop empathy through shared activities. The center director, an older woman with kind eyes, pulled Marcus aside. "You know, we never had anything like this before, he said. "These kids, they're learning that they matter and that they can make a difference in each other's lives. That's because of what you all started." Alex, now semi-retired, looked out at the familiar space, eyes filled with nostalgia. "I remember when this place was just an office," he said with a chuckle. "Now, it feels more like a sanctuary." "It's amazing how much has changed," Lena added. "And it all started with one man and a simple idea." Marcus nodded, the weight of the moment pressing on him. "Mr. Samuel taught us that greatness isn't measured by fame or wealth, but by the lives we touch. His story will always be a part of who we are." Years passed, and Marcus became known as a leading figure in the movement for empathy-driven leadership and community building. He authored a book titled The Samuel Principle, which became a bestseller and was translated into multiple languages. The book recounted the story of Mr. Samuel's life, the growth of the Samuel Initiative, and practical ways to incorporate kindness into everyday life. New leaders emerged, inspired by the stories they had heard. Eliana, who had once stood nervously before an audience sharing her journey, now led her own branch of the initiative, mentoring others and creating change. Every day of kindness event, Marcus and Lena would gather at the company's headquarters with Alex and old friends. They would speak of Mr. Samuel not just as a symbol, but as a friend who had taught them that the world could be different if people were willing to believe in the power of kindness. As Marcus stood before a new generation of young leaders at one such event, he closed with the words that had guided him for so many years. "Remember, the most powerful legacy you can leave isn't built with wealth or power, but with every act of kindness that makes someone's life a little brighter. Be the light. Be the kindness that Mr. Samuel showed us." The applause filled the room, echoing the spirit of Mr. Samuel's teachings. And as Marcus looked out at the hopeful faces, he knew that the story was far from over. It would continue in the actions of those who dared to be kind, even when it was hardest. The influence of the Samuel Initiative stretched into schools, companies, and community programs worldwide. Each place it touched carried forward the idea that one person's kindness could inspire many. Marcus, now a recognized leader in social change, dedicated his time to traveling and collaborating with other advocates who championed the power of empathy in leadership and education. One day, Marcus visited a city that had been deeply divided by social and economic challenges. The local leaders had reached out to the Samuel Initiative, asking for guidance on how to bring their community together. Marcus, accompanied by Lena and a team of experienced volunteers, arrived to see firsthand the struggles that had driven people apart. The first few days were filled with meetings and workshops where Marcus shared stories about Mr. Samuel and how his quiet resilience had transformed lives. At first, the residents listened with skepticism, accustomed to promises that never materialized. But slowly, the stories began to resonate. People started to share their own experiences of kindness, moments that had seemed small, but now held new meaning. A turning point came when an elderly man in the crowd stood up during a community forum. His voice trembled as he spoke. "I used to know a man like Mr. Samuel," he said. "He was my teacher many years ago, and he taught me that helping others is the truest measure of strength. I lost sight of that over the years, but today I remember." The room fell silent, and then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the crowd. That moment became a catalyst for change in the community. People began organizing small acts of kindness, a neighbor fixing another's fence, a local grocer giving free food to struggling families, and volunteers setting up free tutoring for students. Inspired by the success in bringing communities together, Marcus and Lena worked with Alex to create a permanent tribute to Mr. Samuel. In the center of the city, where the company had its roots, they commissioned a monument called the Beacon of Kindness. The structure was simple yet powerful, a bronze statue of an elderly man holding a broom, eyes looking out at the horizon with a quiet smile. The plaque at the base read, "In honor of Samuel Jennings, who taught us that true leadership is found in compassion. May we carry forward his legacy of kindness, one act at a time." On the day of the monument's unveiling, crowds gathered, including employees, students, community leaders, and those who had been impacted by the Samuel Initiative in different parts of the world. Marcus stood before them, the sun casting a warm glow over the gathering. "Mr. Samuel showed us that no act of kindness is too small," Marcus said, voice ringing with conviction. "This monument isn't just a tribute to him. It's a reminder that each of us holds the power to change the world through simple, compassionate acts." As Marcus stepped down from the podium, he watched as people laid flowers, took photos, and read the plaque with reverence. The statue seemed to stand guard, a silent witness to the goodness that was now thriving in the very heart of the city. With the expansion of the Samuel Initiative, Marcus found himself facing new challenges. Not everyone supported the movement. There were critics who questioned the practicality of leading with kindness in competitive industries and fast-paced environments. Articles surfaced debating whether empathy-driven practices could withstand economic pressures and whether they would weaken the drive for success. Lena, always a voice of optimism, urged Marcus to address these challenges head-on. "We need to show that kindness doesn't undermine ambition, it fuels it. We need proof, Marcus." Together, they embarked on a research project collecting data and case studies from companies and schools that had adopted the Samuel Initiative's principles. They documented stories of higher employee satisfaction, increased productivity, and communities that flourished when people felt supported and valued. The culmination of their efforts was presented at a global conference on leadership. Marcus stood on stage, his heart pounding with the weight of proving that Mr. Samuel's legacy was more than just stories. It was a viable blueprint for success. "Kindness is not a liability," Marcus said to the room filled with business leaders, educators, and policymakers. "It's the most powerful asset we have. We have the numbers, but more importantly, we have the stories. The proof that when people lead with empathy, they don't just work better, they live better." The response was overwhelmingly positive. Companies and schools began implementing pilot programs based on the Samuel Initiative, and the movement gained momentum, transforming from a concept into a recognized framework for ethical leadership. Years passed, and Marcus watched as the seeds he and others had planted grew into an orchard of change. Young leaders who had been mentored through the Samuel Initiative started their own programs and businesses, all driven by the principles they learned. Eliana, once a nervous speaker, became a global advocate for educational reform, ensuring that kindness and empathy were taught in classrooms around the world. Marcus, now older and with a family of his own, found great joy in seeing his children learn the values that Mr. Samuel had passed down. On quiet evenings, he would tell them stories of the man who had changed everything, not with grand gestures but with simple, steadfast compassion. One day, Marcus's daughter, Emma, asked, "Daddy, do you think I can be like Mr. Samuel when I grow up?" Marcus's heart swelled with pride and emotion. "You already are, Emma. Every time you help someone or show kindness, you carry on his legacy." The annual Day of Kindness continued, now celebrated in countries far beyond the reach of the original office. On one such day, Marcus returned to the company's headquarters where Lena and Alex were waiting. The three stood by, the beacon of kindness, watching as people gathered to honor Mr. Samuel. "Look at this," Lena said, eyes shining with pride. "It's more than we ever dreamed." Marcus nodded, feeling the presence of Mr. Samuel in every laugh, every handshake, and every story shared. "It is," he said softly, "and it's just the beginning." As they stood there, surrounded by a community united by kindness, Marcus felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The movement had grown beyond him, beyond Lena and Alex, even beyond Mr. Samuel. It had become part of the world, a testament that kindness, when nurtured, could change everything. And so, the story continued, passed from hand to hand, heart to heart, in acts of compassion that would echo for generations to come. As Marcus's children grew, they became more involved in the initiatives that had shaped their father's life. Emma, the eldest, showed a particular interest in understanding the roots of the Samuel Initiative. She often accompanied Marcus to events and listened intently to stories of Mr. Samuel, whose legacy had been the foundation of their family's values. One summer, Emma joined a special youth leadership camp organized by the Samuel Initiative. The camp brought together teenagers from different backgrounds to learn about empathy, leadership, and community service. Emma, eager and full of ideas, quickly became a leader among her peers. She organized activities that encouraged campers to share personal stories and connect through shared experiences. One evening, around a campfire, Emma shared a story that Marcus had told her countless times. The story of Mr. Samuel's quiet strength and the day he stood before a room full of people who finally understood who he was. Her voice was steady, her eyes bright with determination as she spoke. "Mr. Samuel taught my father that true strength lies in kindness, even when it's hard," Emma said, glancing at the faces around her. "And now, we have the chance to carry that lesson forward, to be the ones who lift others up when they need it most." The other campers nodded, some wiping away tears. The campfire crackled, casting warm shadows over the group as they sat in reflective silence. Emma felt a sense of pride and purpose. She knew that her generation would be the ones to continue the work Mr. Samuel had begun. Emma's leadership at the camp caught the attention of Lena, who still played a significant role in overseeing the Samuel Initiative. Lena reached out to Marcus with an idea. "Marcus, Emma has something special," Lena said during a meeting at the office. "She reminds me of you when we first started. I think it's time we encourage her to take on more responsibilities within the initiative." Marcus's heart swelled with a mix of pride and bittersweet emotion. Emma was following in his footsteps, which meant the legacy of Mr. Samuel was evolving into the hands of the next generation. He nodded. "Let's give her the chance." Emma's involvement in the initiative grew. She organized events, spoke at schools, and even led a pilot program aimed at teaching younger children the importance of empathy through storytelling and interactive activities. The program, called Samuel's Stories, was an instant success. Children eagerly participated, sharing their own stories of kindness and learning to see each other as equals. Leading a new wave of initiatives came with its own set of challenges. Emma faced skepticism from those who questioned whether young leaders could maintain the integrity of the original mission. She encountered resistance from those who believed that teaching empathy was impractical in an increasingly competitive world. One day, after a particularly difficult meeting with a group of potential sponsors who dismissed her ideas as idealistic, Emma sought solace at the Beacon of Kindness. She sat on a bench nearby, lost in thought, when Marcus joined her. "It's hard, isn't it?" Marcus said, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I remember feeling the same way when we were just starting out." Emma looked up, eyes filled with determination. "I know it's worth it, Dad. I just wish more people believed in it." Marcus smiled softly. "They will, Emma. They just need to see it in action. Just like Mr. Samuel showed me and I showed others. Keep going, even when it's hard. That's when kindness matters most." Inspired by her father's words, Emma pushed forward. She developed new strategies to demonstrate the tangible benefits of empathy-driven programs, gathering data and testimonials that showed improvements in school performance and community relationships. Slowly, minds began to change, and the movement gained more support. As Emma's programs flourished, younger leaders joined her, inspired by the message and eager to make a difference. Samuel's stories expanded into more schools, incorporating workshops that blended storytelling, empathy exercises, and community projects. Emma's influence grew, and she became known as a leading advocate for integrating kindness into educational curricula worldwide. Marcus watched proudly as Emma and her siblings carried forward the lessons that Mr. Samuel had taught. He reflected on the years that had passed and how a simple act of kindness from an elderly janitor had set in motion a chain of events that now spanned generations. One evening, during a global summit on education and leadership, Emma took the stage to speak to an audience of thousands. She stood tall, her voice confident as she shared the story of Mr. Samuel and the enduring impact of his legacy. "We're here today because one man believed in the power of kindness," Emma said, looking out over the attentive crowd. "He taught us that true leadership isn't about standing above others, but standing with them, offering a hand when no one else will. We carry that torch now, and it's up to us to keep it burning bright." The applause that followed was thunderous. Marcus, sitting in the audience next to Lena, felt tears well in his eyes. He glanced at Lena, who smiled and whispered, "He would be so proud." Years turned into decades, and the Samuel Initiative became a global symbol of what could be achieved when kindness and empathy were at the forefront of leadership. Emma's work laid the foundation for new programs that brought people together in unprecedented ways, fostering understanding and cooperation across cultures and borders. The lessons that Mr. Samuel had passed down through Marcus, Lena, and countless others were alive in every act of compassion and every story shared. The world, though still imperfect, was better for it. Proof that even the smallest act of kindness could create ripples that reached far beyond what anyone could imagine. As Emma stood in front of a new class of young leaders at the Samuel Initiative's training center, she paused and smiled. Behind her, a mural of Mr. Samuel looked on, his eyes filled with the same quiet encouragement that had inspired generations. "This isn't just a story about the past," Emma said. "It's a story that belongs to each of you. It's your turn to be the light, to carry forward the lessons of kindness and make them your own. And remember, it only takes one person to start a ripple that can change the world." The young faces in the audience nodded, their eyes reflecting hope and determination. The legacy of kindness lived on, growing stronger with each new generation ready to believe, act, and inspire. Emma's work within the Samuel Initiative and her global advocacy for empathy in education began to inspire broader movements. Leaders from various fields, politics, business, healthcare, and technology, sought advice on how to integrate the principles of kindness and empathy into their practices. Emma found herself speaking at international conferences, participating in panels with world leaders, and collaborating with organizations that shared the vision of a kinder, more understanding world. In one significant project, Emma partnered with international NGOs to create programs that supported conflict resolution in areas impacted by social and political unrest. The initiative's message resonated. To break cycles of violence and mistrust, one must first learn to see others through a lens of empathy. The program began in communities that had been divided for decades. Schools became safe spaces where children learned about each other's cultures, stories, and perspectives. Acts of kindness became a common language that transcended barriers, planting seeds of trust and friendship where suspicion once thrived. Emma often reflected on how far-reaching the legacy of Mr. Samuel had become. What had started in a small office, with a humble janitor who swept floors with quiet dignity, now spanned continents and connected people who might never have found common ground otherwise. As Emma's influence grew, so did the emergence of new voices inspired by her work. One of these voices was Amir, a young activist from the Middle East who had experienced firsthand the power of the Samuel Initiative in his war-torn community. Amir's story was one of resilience. He had lost family members to conflict but found hope in the lessons of empathy that Emma brought to his town. Amir began leading workshops in refugee camps, teaching children that kindness wasn't just an abstract idea, but a way to rebuild trust and hope. His sessions included storytelling circles where participants shared their dreams and fears, learning to see each other as more than just survivors. Emma visited Amir's camp during one of her global tours. Seeing the laughter and connection among the children, she felt the profound impact of their work. Amir approached her with a smile. "This is because of you, and because of Mr. Samuel's story," he said. Emma's eyes shone with pride. "No, Amir, this is because of you. You took what you learned and shared it with those who needed it most. That's how this legacy grows." Despite the widespread success, not all was smooth sailing. Skeptics continued to challenge the practicality of empathy-driven leadership, arguing that in times of crisis, competitiveness and strength were more valuable than compassion. Some political leaders attempted to discredit the movement, framing it as too idealistic in an increasingly polarized world. Emma, along with Marcus and their allies, responded not with arguments but with evidence. They showcased data from communities where acts of kindness had reduced crime rates, improved economic outcomes, and increased trust among citizens. They told stories of leaders who had turned their struggling organizations around by adopting empathy-based practices. One day, during an interview on a major news network, Emma was asked, "What do you say to those who believe kindness is a luxury we can't afford in a world like ours?" Emma paused thoughtfully. "Kindness isn't a luxury. It's the foundation of any society that hopes to thrive. It doesn't mean we abandon strength or practicality. It means we strengthen our communities from the inside out. And if history has shown us anything, it's that true progress comes not from division, but from understanding." Her response went viral, reigniting conversations about the importance of empathy in global policies and practices. As Emma approached her 40s, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Her father, Marcus, now spent more time mentoring from behind the scenes, proud of the movement his daughter had carried forward. Lena had become a globally recognized advocate, still passionately involved and traveling the world to speak about the power of empathy. One day, Emma received an invitation to speak at the United Nations. The topic was empathy and leadership in a changing world, and she would be presenting alongside influential figures who were reshaping international relations. The event was a testament to how far the Samuel Initiative had come and its influence on a global scale. As she stood on the stage before a room filled with dignitaries, leaders, and youth advocates, she began her speech with the words that had defined her journey. This story begins with one man who believed that the smallest act of kindness could change everything. His name was Samuel Jennings, and his legacy is proof that one person's belief can ignite a movement that touches the entire world. Emma's speech at the United Nations sparked new initiatives worldwide. Schools in developing countries adopted the Samuel Initiative's principles, and governments sought to integrate empathy into their national educational curricula. Amir, now a renowned youth leader, launched a parallel initiative called Voices of Kindness, which brought young leaders from different backgrounds together to collaborate on solutions for global challenges. Emma's own children, now teenagers, began taking active roles in the initiative, running local programs that encouraged their peers to think about how their actions affected others. Emma watched them with pride, seeing Mr. Samuel's teachings woven into the next generation's hearts and minds. One evening, as the sun set over their family home, Marcus and Emma sat together on the porch. Marcus, now older and wiser, took Emma's hand in his. "Did you ever think it would grow this big?" Marcus asked, his voice tinged with emotion. Emma smiled, eyes drifting to the horizon. "I don't think Mr. Samuel ever imagined this, but that's the beauty of kindness. It doesn't just stop. It grows and reaches places we never thought possible." Marcus nodded, the warmth of the setting sun washing over them. "He would be so proud of you, Emma, and I am too." Emma squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of their shared journey and the legacy they carried together. The story of kindness, which had started with a humble janitor, now spanned generations, crossing borders and touching countless lives. And though the world still faced challenges, the light of empathy burned brighter than ever, carried forward by those who believed that even the smallest act of kindness could change everything. As the years passed, the Samuel Initiative became more than a movement. It was a cornerstone in educational systems, business ethics, and community development worldwide. The story of Mr. Samuel's unwavering belief in kindness had been shared so many times that it was no longer just a story. It had become a legend. Emma, now an influential leader and mother herself, watched as her children, inspired by their family's history, became advocates for empathy in their own unique ways. Marcus, having stepped back from the public eye, found joy in seeing how the seeds he and Mr. Samuel had planted so many years ago had flourished into a forest of change. Lena continued her work as a mentor, touching lives and encouraging the next wave of leaders to build on what they had started. One winter evening, Emma gathered her family, including Marcus, Lena, and a group of close friends, at the headquarters of the Samuel Initiative. The building, adorned with murals depicting scenes of kindness and resilience, felt like a living museum of Mr. Samuel's life and the countless stories that had followed. They sat around a large table, sharing stories, laughing, and reminiscing. The room was filled with warmth, not just from the crackling fire but from the bonds that had been formed through years of shared purpose and passion. As the laughter died down, Emma stood and raised her glass. "To Mr. Samuel," she said, her voice steady with gratitude, "to the man who taught us that the smallest acts can create the biggest waves, and that true strength is found in lifting others up." "To Mr. Samuel," everyone echoed, voices soft with reverence. The world continued to change, as it always does, but the legacy of the Samuel Initiative endured. Schools dedicated libraries to Mr. Samuel's teachings, companies redefined success with empathy at their core, and communities came together under the banner of kindness and compassion. His statue, the beacon of kindness, became a global symbol of hope and resilience. Emma's children, now adults, carried on the work with the same passion that had fueled generations before them. They spoke of Mr. Samuel not as a figure from the past, but as an ever-present force, guiding them in moments of doubt and challenge. And though Mr. Samuel was no longer there in body, his spirit lingered in every story shared, in every act of kindness given freely, and in every leader who chose to stand with others rather than above them. For in every act of kindness his legacy lived on, proving that the world could indeed be changed by one person, one moment, one ripple at a time. The story of the Samuel Initiative serves as a timeless reminder of the profound impact that one person's kindness can have on the world. From the quiet, unassuming acts of Mr. Samuel, a janitor who once swept floors with dignity, to the global movement led by Marcus, Lena, and Emma, this journey illustrates that true leadership is rooted in compassion and empathy. Mr. Samuel's legacy is more than a story. It's a testament to the power of believing that even the smallest gestures can create ripples far beyond what one can see. His influence transformed a corporate office into a community of understanding and eventually spread across the globe, impacting countless lives and reshaping how people viewed success and leadership. Emma and Marcus, carrying forward the torch, proved that the lessons of kindness could be adapted and expanded for new generations and new challenges. Through their work, they showed that acts of empathy are not just idealistic but practical, forming the foundation for resilient, thriving communities. As the world continues to change, the teachings of Mr. Samuel endure, reminding us that no matter how complex or divided things may become, there is always power in kindness. And, while one person's influence may begin as a small ripple, with time, commitment, and the courage to act, it can grow into waves that touch shores far beyond what was ever imagined. In the end, Mr. Samuel's story is a call to action for all of us, to lead with empathy, to build with compassion, and to remember that every act of kindness holds the potential to change the world. Thank you for watching this powerful story of transformation and the incredible impact of kindness. If this story resonated with you, don't just let it end here. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, it only takes one small act of kindness to start a ripple that can change lives. If you believe in the power of empathy and compassion, hit the like button, subscribe for more stories that inspire, and leave a comment below sharing your own experiences with acts of kindness. Let's build a community that uplifts and supports one another. Together, we can make the world a little brighter, one act at a time.